A smile from an unexpected face helps me have a better day. When the sun hides its light and the ground turns frozen, it is your smile that makes me feel chosen, and my body warms, my feet defrost the earth. The kindness of sensing my worth when a lady as sensational as her saw more than my bruised face, beaten by many forms of fate. It was good chance I asked her to explain, why smile at me? Am I mistaken? She said no. Let this expression secure you in your haven. Remember me as being the angel you always wished seeing.
Mel is also the founding member of the Coalitions for Civil Freedoms. Founded in 2010, that Coalition for Civil Freedoms advocates for others who were arrested on similar charges. Mel, thank you so much for speaking this morning. I get you.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about poetry and a prisoner at a federal prison today, but I want to give you a little background first. In 2003, one of my colleagues at the University of South Florida was arrested and charged with terrorism. That was Dr. Samuel Arian, who we sang about. He was a tenured and highly respected professor at University of South Florida. And he was also well known and active in the outside community, working with different church groups and various things. And the government went after him because he was a political activist working quite effectively for the rights of Palestinians. And Friends of Human Rights was formed to advocate for him in 2003. So he was in his pre-trial in solitary confinement for 2.5 years in a federal prison, like 2 hours from his home. And his treatment was unbelievable. He had strip searches every time he was taken in or out of his cell. He lost his phone privileges once for 6 months because he he did a three-way call to connect a mother in Egypt with the rest of the family. There was a frequent lockdown and many more things happened. I could go on. And this was all before the trial. He was the only person in Coleman Federal Prison who hadn't been convicted of anything. So the trial started in 2005 and it lasted for 6 months. So the whole trial was a theater of the absurd. And the jury agreed, and they were unanimous that Sammy was not a terrorist, but because 2 of the jurors did not want to completely acquit Sammy, the government was able to continue this vendetta against him, and it was 7 more years before he obtained his freedom. A Norwegian filmmaker, Lena Halvorsen, happened to be in Florida during the trial, and so she made a movie of the trial. It's a very good movie. I recommend it. The finished film is called USA versus Al Arian. And about the same time, the people who now make up our legal team, Steve Downs and Kathy Manley, were involved in another very unjust case about Yassin Aref, who was an imam in Albany, New York. And he and his co-defendant, Mohammed Hossein, were entrapped by an FBI informant in a fabricated case. Project Salam was born to advocate for these 2 men. Steve and Kathy also started investigating, and they were struck by the large number of unjust terrorism cases around the country. So, in 2010, Sammy brought Friends of Human Rights, Project Salam, and 16 other organizations together in his daughter's apartment where he was under house arrest, and the Coalition for Civil Freedoms was born. And at the time, it was called the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. So after 9/11, the FBI was tasked with preventing the next terror attack, and so they started looking for terrorists everywhere. One of their early targets were influential people, particularly those who advocated for Palestine. And then, so Sammy was an example of that type, and their hope is to silence those people. Another type of target was naive and vulnerable young men. So our coalition has a database with over 1,000 cases like that. Entrapment and preemptive prosecution of vulnerable and naive young people turned out to be an easy way for the FBI to look like they're doing something to keep us safe. So CCF works to advocate for and support these political prisoners and their families in a number of ways. For Ramadan, we send gifts of $100 to over 200 prisoners. And we're beginning a prisoner sponsorship program for those prisoners who don't have any outside financial support. And our legal team has been successful in getting people out of prison on compassionate release. Most recently, the Newburgh Four. These four men were sentenced to 25 years. The motion that they filed took 15 years off their sentence. And another relatively recent thing we do is a poetry program. So poetry is very important to the prisoners, giving them a way to express their thoughts and feelings. And the prisoners send us poems, and then we print them in our news digest and on social media. So our founder, Dr. Samuel Arian, wrote a book of poetry while he was in prison. So I'm going to ask Carolyn to read one of his poems. So this is the book that he wrote when he was in prison. And this is the first poem. That's the first.
Innocent. He's been indicted. The general decided, the paper incited, he must be guilty. The agent presumed, prosecutors consumed, the judge assumed, we're sure he's guilty. The bigots are enthused, TV is amused, the public is confused, but trust us, he's guilty. Doesn't matter what we saw, we'll simply change the law, call it the final straw, we think he's guilty. We have him on call, it may be to a congressional hall. Our goal is to make him fall, because we believe he's guilty. The trial would be perfect when guilty is the verdict, even if the evidence is suspect. Never mind, we find him guilty. But he only spoke his mind to people of every kind. Justice may be blind, but it's been hard to find because he's innocent.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about one of our most prolific poets, who is Adam Dandach. I think of him as our poet laureate. This is a picture of him. So I'll do that. You can look at it closer later if you want to. So Adam, he's one of those vulnerable people who are easy targets for the FBI. So when he was a teenager, his daily life consisted of a culture clash, wanting to live the American life while maintaining his Islamic roots. This was a very difficult time for Americans with the post-9/11 era, and all the prejudice expressed towards Middle Easterners was very hard on Adam. He was socially isolated and had a lot of mental health issues that caused him to develop self-defeating behaviors. He suffered from depression and PTSD. His father was abusive and his parents were divorced. So he was young when he made the unwise choice of attempting to travel to Syria in 2014. And he was met at the airport by FBI agents. And they did not arrest him there, they just talked to him. They let him go, but then they came the next day to arrest him when he was visiting his sister, Netta, who had just given birth to her first child, her daughter, and Adam's beloved niece, Farah. And as Adam said, he learned his lesson from the FBI agent speaking to him, the interaction at the airport, and he did not at all anticipate arrest. He was going to live out his life normally by continuing college and living with his family in California. He was 20 years old at the time. So he never committed any violence, but he was convicted of material support of terrorism and sentenced to 15 years in prison. And even at the sentencing, the judge recognized that he suffered from depression and PTSD from his difficult childhood. So when he went to prison, things got harder. He's away from his family. He's 2,000 miles from home. He hasn't seen his mother since 2017. And he hasn't seen his sister Sarah since 2016. The Bureau of Prison staff diagnosed him with severe schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type 1, and autism spectrum disorder. And prisons are very bad places all the time, but especially if you have mental illnesses. And some prisons are a lot worse than others. So one example of incidents that happened to him in prison, In 2019, he experienced a psychotic breakdown in which he attempted suicide by cutting his razor deep into his bone in order to bleed to death. And it was a sudden suicide attack, is how Adam described it, in which he had wanted to take his own life. He also attempted to tie a sheet up to the noose to hang himself. And so how did the prison respond? They put him in solitary confinement. And this is solitary suicide watch. This is like the worst thing you can do to somebody with mental illness, you know. And a lot of people realize that it may be the worst form of torture. So currently, he's an inmate at the Federal Medical Center in Rochester, which is still a prison, but it is a much better prison. And so in the 10 years that he's been up there, he's been trying to understand his mental illness and to deal with it. So his mental health has been very stable for the last few years because he has taken control of his life and gotten on track in spite of being in these horrible, horrible conditions. And in my opinion, anyway, to a large extent, his poetry has helped him do this. And I've been collecting his poetry for 4 years now. And like all of us, he's had his ups and downs, and his poems reflect this. And so I've got a few here, and I'm going to ask you all to read them.
This poem is entitled Sicker, 10/20/2021. The darker the soul, the sicker the fate. A small flicker of light, stark as my face. Spark the flames, then erase remnants of man. A lively being whose potential can reach horizons untouched. Soar the skies. Phoenix that never dies. A god that cries. I touch the zenith with sharp fingertips. Angels play harps and joy lingers my lips. Suddenly the tides turn to consume me, sucked in the ocean current, darker seas.
In between, dated January 13th this year. Life stands next to death. What stands in between? Something of a fog, murky and polluted. It is called patience, something we all practice, even if it seems we do not. We are still alive, are we not?
Fortune? Fortune, dated March 23rd, 1924. Reminiscent of my youth, the fleeting time, bound only by absolute truth. A soft-spoken adult, strong in mind, a teardrop on her cheek, signifying the pride in her son. I cannot question scattered memories I cannot question scattered memories that are consistent as haphazard is defined. Hearts are the center of intelligence in the confines of our frail framework. And until midnight strikes tonight, shall I reminisce to embrace the future of the fortune of love?
Merging colors. I find it almost inconceivable, the hidden senses in me and the inspirations in my heart lead me to flow amongst the color spectrum, merging into the beauty of nature's eyes. And I put on her rose-colored lenses to stare above at a vast deep sky, an ocean in disguise, a surging horizon, negating a human's sorrow. We forget it all because of this gaze. This is the world we have borrowed.
Okay. Insanity, June 3rd of 24. The voice that comforted me from above ground, promising to wait for the day I resurrect. I defied fate, and I climbed out of the coffin I was trapped in. My fragile remains ached as they could not contain to see the angel that was calling my name. to draw me out of the grave's heat and erase my mental pain. All that I dreamt during my slumber ended then by the violent thunder. You are nothing but a demon in my view, not a pure spirit. It was all misconstrued. I asked God to silence my agony and submerge me back to my home, to my grave of insanity.
The Seed, July 24. The sun's glare glistens like my soul. Wake from the night's lair to proceed as I will seek out freedom's gold deep in the crystal lake, the seed. Then grows the rose in the abyss, in the cracks, the rift. I am pure. I stand straight when all serpents hiss. My thorns deter, my petals cure. In the life beyond, life beneath, life above, mankind is a seed, blossomed to a contorted wreath, decorative flowers that bleed. The bells of freedom chime out loud, shining angels singing in tune. I enter a new life, head bowed, humbled to sleep beneath this tomb.
This is the storm. The autumn vision, crying amber tears. Sorrow creeps in, darkness feeds on my fears. Passions wither, my despair then caves in. I shiver in cold hatred, raging wind. Slices through my chest, I weep all alone. The song of love, empty of a sweet tone. Longing to drink from a sweet mountain spring. Sink to the floor of hell where demons sing. My fate, my demise, the ultimate storm, the face of God caught in the eye of his scorn, crying for the moment to be reborn in a place where I am no longer torn.
Gem. Captivated by the glimmer, the one that shines in my visions. It sparkles like a sapphire. It is the gem of freedom.
I wanted to end on a positive note. So anyway, just finish up about Adam. He's a very hard worker. In the last year or so, he's written over 65 poems and songs. And he's currently editing his first book of poetry. It's got 70 poems in it, and he's going to be submitting it for publication. And he's asked me for advice. I don't know anything about that, so if anybody here has advice I could pass on to him, let me know. And so I've been very impressed with Adam, and another very impressive thing that Adam has done was to write a motion for compassionate release on his own. I mentioned that our lawyers have done that successfully for a few of our prisoners, and it is not at all an easy process, very time-consuming. And Adam has done this, and his motion is currently in the works. So right now, his release date is October 2027. He has done a good job with his motion and a very good job with his life, getting his life back together. And I'm optimistic that he'll be out before then and home with his mother and sister. So send me all your positive thoughts. And
I really appreciate your speaking for all those who are in prison because of the mockery of justice our culture can make. I will lay one final candle for Adam. That he be able to keep his poetry alive. And I thank you for your work on his behalf.